as a pioneer and as someone who, as Esie and I have talked about, as someone who from very young age, high school, pre-high school, and then moving to Santa Barbara in high school, was showing the signs of her greatness. And I felt like I wanted to get into the Martha Graham that became Martha Graham.
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Greetings, everybody. That's where you speak back, huh? I gotta make sure everybody's here. You know, it's very necessary. I know.
So far, so good, right? Really.
The ability to be steadfast in your vision means you have to have patience to see it through, despite any obstacles that can come along the way. Martha Graham is a pioneer, a trailblazer, who has left the world better because she was in it. Challenging ideologies and expanding what it means to be a dancer, choreographer, creator, and a visionary for over a century. As the dancer, Alma Guillermo Pretro pointed out, Graham was the first creator of the modern dance to devise a truly universal dance technique out of the movements she developed in her choreography. Martha Graham. I knew of her, but I didn't know much about her. And I was shocked when I realized that there was aspects of her journey that reflected my own. Maya Angelou speaks about placing our icons outside of the realm of a normal human being. We all need to see ourselves in the people we admire because it will entice us to reach higher in our own goals. And I must say, Martha has left me inspired. I want to indulge you all for a second. Can you close your eyes? Place your hand on your heart. And as a collective, take 3 deep breaths in. Every time you breathe life in or expel it, it's a release or a contraction. It's basic to the body. You're born with these 2 movements, and you will keep both until you die. From Martha Graham. Now, Elizabeth already did the lovely introduction, so I'm just gonna get right into the questions for dear Neil here. In January 2008, you attended a rehearsal that changed your perspective on dance. Can you explain how that rehearsal compelled you to write this book?
It was, I would call it a visceral epiphany, by which I mean it was here and not here. And I have spent my entire career from up here until I was asked if I would like to attend a rehearsal that was being conducted by the chief artistic associate of the Martha Graham Company, Denise Vale, who had come to set her classic Steps in the Street on our dance majors at Montclair State University more than 15 years ago. And the dance department wanted me to bring my energy into the room and see what would happen. I was already working with the theater students, and they wanted me to come over to their side, as it were. I said, okay. And I went in there, in the auditorium. I was the only person in the audience, and all the students were up on stage with Denise. And they started moving their bodies in a way that I had never experienced before. There was a certain way in which they were devouring space. They were cutting into space. They were extending their limbs as if toward impossible goals. Their front face was very stern, very idealistic, very convinced, very resolute. And their sense of rhythm was palpable, and they seemed to want me to hear them breathing. They wanted me to know that they were dancers and that they were dancing and that I should be conscious of this while they were dancing. And I stress these points because I had never seen dance technique that hit me with such force, such visceral force. And I thought to myself, I got up after a while from the rehearsal and I went out. I remember it was very cold. It was January. It was a very cold day. I was walking to the faculty parking lot, of course. So I was walking to the faculty parking lot, and I realized that this would have to be my next biographical mission. And I don't want to make it sound like it was facile. It's just that I was between projects. I had spent my whole life documenting the modernist trajectory through the arts, industry, intellectually, etc. And I had not come to terms with the modern body. And so I resolved that would be my next project. And I just want to say, so we can get on with this next question, but it took me another 4 years before I was able to get up the courage to talk to the Martha Graham Company, to Janet Elber, who was the director, and get her approval for my project. Because I spent the first 4 years seeking out the entire corpus of what had been written before. And I felt like there was a new story to tell.
Just on to that last point, why did you think that there was an aspect of her life and her journey that we hadn't heard before?
Because, and if any of you have read Blood Memory, which is her memoir, which I found to be very amusing, entertaining, and it had some nice anecdotes, but there was something obfuscating about it. There was something like an emotional smoke screen, excuse me, an emotional smoke screen or silk screen. No, an emotional smoke screen in terms of like, I've spent my whole life writing about other people, and I always start by reading what they've written about themselves as a way into them. And this was one of the most opaque memoirs that I've ever come across. And also it was all disjuncted and it was out of sequence, and certain things were disproportionately emphasized and other things were skimmed over or emphasized. And then I went on to the other great work. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Agnes de Mille's monumental book, Martha. So once I came to understand Agnes de Mille's relationship to Martha, and I realized the contentiousness and the rivalry and the emotional underpinnings of it, and the fact that Agnes de Mille for a long time had wanted to be part of Martha's company, and Martha never let her in, and they became friends. They had a falling out. There was a lot of a huge amount of nuancing and gossip going on throughout the whole years of their relationship, and eventually, toward the end, Martha stopped talking to her completely, and also called all of her friends and tried to get them to stop cooperating with Agnes. So the bottom line was, I felt like I was going to come at this from a more holistic view, since I'm a student of the human condition, number one, but number two, I'm a student of the aesthetic of modernism, and how did she fit in? No one seemed to have taken a look at this woman as an exemplar of modernism as a whole, and as kind of the connective tissue for the entire modern movement, as a pioneer, and as someone who, as Esie and I have talked about, as someone who from very young age, high school, pre-high school and then moving to Santa Barbara in high school, was showing the signs of her greatness. And I felt like I wanted to get into the Martha Graham that became Martha Graham.
That's beautiful. It's, as you said that, I think about the ways in which you were able to capture memories, 80 plus years of memories that I felt was really profound and quite, poetic, to be able to feel like you were there for that conversation. I was like, how did he get these quotes? This is very extensive quotes. How did the research that you did?
I think the main thing that distinguished the research for this book, which was the most, for me, transformative, was two things. One, thank goodness there are lots of oral history tapes of recordings of the sort of formative Martha Graham dancers from the 20s and 30s, because during the 1970s and 80s, these mostly women, but not entirely women, there were several oral history projects going on at the Library of Congress and at the New York Public Library in New York, where people were sitting down with these dancers and actually getting them to talk about what was going on during the formative years of the company. And also Eric Hawkins, if you do read the book, or if you have read the book, or will read the book, this relationship I felt I needed to correct the sort of misperceptions and exaggerations having to do with this the great love relationship of her life, and how they met, and how the relationship really went on back and forth, and how they broke up but didn't really break up, and all these kind of nuances. And luckily, Eric Hawkins, when he was in his late 50s or so, he spent several days in a long interview with Don McDonough, who was then the dance critic for the New York Times, and that was at the New York Public Library. That was about a 10-hour long interview that I listened to. The other part that I wanted to mention was the compared to these other people in her company, Martha Graham's own record is very, very slender. And as again, it sort of unfortunately confirmed my intuition that she was not someone to whom this came easily, and not someone who really was by nature wanting to share. But I felt like if I did the kind of process that I've done in my other books, where I go around the person and talk to or listen to or read about as many of the other people that make up her context, then that is how I will be able to provide a fuller picture of her. So for just one example, I knew she was at a party. It was very hard to find places where Martha Graham went to parties. I don't know if you are aware of this, but this is one of my Martha, sort of unknown Martha facts. But it's interesting because just judged from her career, you thought, oh, she's probably out every night and, after the show, going to whomever's place or going. No, she was completely averse to that. And she said that, if you go around acting like a bohemian and talking about it, that you're a bohemian, you're never going to get any work done. Yeah. And I have to get my work done. So she would, after the show, and there are dancers in the room, I'm sure there are some, I can see there are some, or even if you were a dancer one time. So you have the show, and then you go back to your dressing room and you put your street clothes on, you get your bag, and you go out, and everybody says, oh, where do you want to go? Let's go to this place, let's go to that place. And so they would all go out, and she would come out of the theater, and she would say goodbye. She would walk to her one-room apartment in Greenwich Village so she could save on the car fare. And besides what, she never went in the subway, never took the subway. She would walk back downtown from Broadway, let's say, the Broadway area, and she'd get into her cot, and she'd scrunch up her knees like this in her bed, and she'd put her blanket over her, and she'd get her stack of library books, which I've seen, and her stenographic notebooks that she used to write about her dances, and she would start to work on her next dance. And so this was the Martha Graham that created 180 works. And I must say that really was an eye-opener for me.
It's interesting, to hear you say that. I also watched Alvin Ailey's documentary that they had done on him.
Yeah.
And there's something about, as a creator, when you get to a certain, or you as a recluse, you having to pull back and essentially create distance with people in your company. But obviously, it doesn't mean that it's not affecting you. Obviously, she wanted companionship, she wanted friends,
yes.
That surround you. And when you separate yourself from that, obviously there's gonna be effects to that. And it's always a big question. It was a big question that I was left with after I watched Alvin Ailey's documentary, because, I always wondered, who would you be if you did reach out? Does that shift the dynamic in the room with your dancers? Will they respect you the same if you do go out for that drink?
That's an excellent question, excellent question. A few things come to mind, again, that were revealed to me through the dancers' perspectives on Martha. It was kind of like that, kind of like this Martha with a capital M. Actually, all the letters would be capital letters.
Yeah.
But seriously, I'm sure she would agree. Maybe not. So when she was, shall we say, developing a dance for the company, before she took them into the studio and talked to them and sort of did a few gestural moves about it, she would come in early. She would be the first person to the studio, and she would tie the doors to the studio together with a special red gross grain ribbon that knotted together so that no one could get in there until she was finished. And she would be in there by herself with Louis Horst, who was her, as you may know, her longtime accompanist and her music director. And she would work out the piece on her own body. She would set it on herself. Then the company would come in and the process would begin. And one of the things that, just to respond to this question, that I noticed was many of the dancers, like you've heard of Yuriko, who recently passed away. When I had one conversation with her, and she said to me, Martha treated us like we were the colors on her palette, and she was an artist. And we were if you see the analogy, I thought it was a very interesting analogy, because you have to have the knowledge of the spectrum of the colors and know how to use them. Now, another example would be the idea that when Martha was dancing with the company, I remember, I think it was Mae O'Donnell who said in one of her interviews that Martha was a very few words off stage, but when we were together on stage, and especially if you got to hold her hand, you felt that she was totally with you. That when she was among her people on stage, she was of her people. But she also needed to have this, I think, very monastic kind of life that she led for her whole life. So there was this interesting dichotomy. Toward the end, she became lonely and isolated, more isolated, and she would start to call, call people up in the middle of the night and want to just talk about random subjects, or maybe even Linda Hodes, Stuart Hodes just passed away. So she's his widow. She's 90. I just talked to her the other day. She's the one that said to me about 3 or 4 years ago, you better hurry up and finish that book because I'm not going to be around forever. Anyway, we still joke about this, and she wants me to do volume 2. Why don't when are you going to start volume 2 now? Because I'm not going to be around forever. But anyway, Linda told me that Martha would sometimes call her up and ask if she wanted to go shopping, like to Bergdorf's or something like that. So there were these little sort of outreach incursions. And also Martha Graham was very mindful of many of the other dancers were married. They had kids while they were in her company. She was very warm, sort of like she was, Linda Hodes and Stuart Hodes' daughter, Martha, is named after Martha Graham. She was born in 1958. She's her goddaughter. So, yeah, there's a very strong sense of this bifurcation where you can also, you find her being in a rehearsal and suddenly stopping the rehearsal. I've seen this on some of the videos. And then she'll point to someone in the company and say, get up, stop, show us what you just did. Everybody stop, you, she would say, you. Show us, come up here, show us what you just did. And then she'd say, we're going to keep that. We're going to keep that. That would be part of it. So there would be these kinds of in and out is a good way of describing it, I think.
Yeah, I don't know how many put your hand up if you're a dancer or choreographer. Wonderful.
Okay.
Yes. So, to me, one of the most amazing things as a choreographer is to utilize your dancers for a vision. So as you read a book, those words on that page, choosing those words, those particular words, for Neil as a writer, choosing those particular words are a very, very important aspect. So as a dancer, as a choreographer, those bodies in a room are the exact same thing. And how they help you. I like to tell my dancers, I love mistakes because those are the impulses. Something true is coming out in those moments. And to have that truth come out, to be able to say, yes, that is what I want. That is what I need. To me, it's a remarkable thing. And even though, she did find herself on her own island, to me, those are the moments that people cherish when they work with her. As you said, that if you were lucky enough to hold her hand on stage, that's a very intimate moment to think that, I was one of very few people that got a chance to work so intimately with her.
Oh, yes.
It's a memory you hold on to.
So right now, my relationship to the company, I've been sitting in on, I've been privileged to have sat in on rehearsals for the past 10 or more years and been to all their concerts and talked to all the dancers. Some of them are not with the company anymore. And on Wednesday night, I'm doing the talk back after the Joyce Theater season in New York, after the curtain chat. But this is a very important point that Esie's making here, which is that I came to this, I started out as a poet back in my early days, back in the 20th century. And I think that, I started out, I'm joking about it, but it was of course a very serious thing to be a poet. It still is. So I started out as a poet, and I've had 6 months since this book was published to reflect and think about how I came up, how I achieved the ability to approach this art form, and I think it has to do with my poetry background. I'm saying this to say that one of my goals in the book was to do honor to her work, yes, but to expand the awareness of her artistic methods to people who are also not familiar with dance, like the way I was when I started writing the book. So that's one of the things that Martha Graham taught me while I was writing the book, was that dancers would tell me, Janet Elber, who started when she was 19 years old with Martha Graham, so she was just out of Juilliard. She said Martha Graham's, one of her great gifts was to elicit what was best in the dancers from inside them. She had a very authoritarian manner. She had a very dictatorial, didactic manner and way of speaking. Have you ever heard her, her very imperious way of speaking? She has this very lofty kind of persona, but in fact, in the rehearsal room, she had this gift for seeing what was inside of a dancer that she could pull out in a way that would help her make a dance. It's very, very, I think it's very pedagogically. I mean, she was a great teacher. She always used to say that she only taught because she had to make a living, and she had her school, which is still going on today. But everybody who I've talked to who still remembers or who talks about it on the tape, everyone talks about her inductive manner of setting dances. Because of the term setting, and for dancers, like to me, that when I first heard that term, I thought, oh, that someone comes in and goes like, okay, this is the dance, and here, boom, and you just do what I tell you, and you go through the thing, and I want you to do this, I want you to do that. But you see, with Martha Graham, because her fundamental technique was so beautifully conceived, then once she got the dancers to indoctrinate to her technique, then she could pull out, as I say, their latent greatness and shape it for this larger good. And I really feel like I learned that from her.
I have to commend you and just to say thank you, because I said to Neil in our many conversations that we've had.
Yeah, we have talked before this. A couple of times.
Yes. But the way you speak of dance, I actually think that you should write a course. Like, you should actually have a course on how to express dance through words. I think that would be when you read the book, if you have read the book, you'll understand what I'm talking about. And I can understand where your foundation as a poet came in when you speak about dance. I've never heard anybody, I've been dancing now for 16 years, I've never heard anybody speak of dance so beautifully the way that Neil writes it. And I just have to, that in itself is an experience, because it actually opens up your imagination. I was like, I've never heard gestures spoken so beautifully. All she's doing is putting her hand on his shoulder and looking to the left and swinging her arm, but it sounds so eloquent, which I think sometimes as dance artists, we feel like we have to downplay our work. But when you have somebody that can speak so beautifully about the art form that we love so much, with just so much care and truth and depth. How was that journey in transforming what you saw through videos and through archival footage into words?
Well, William Butler Yeats, the poet, he used to say, in one of his poems, he said, "We must labor to make it natural." And I feel like this book, is my hair grayer than it was 15 years ago? But there's a few reasons. Not just listening to interviews and and reading and scholarship. But being in the studio, because I was a professor at Montclair State at the time, and I was working with the dance majors I created a course called Danceturgy, which is like the dance version of dramaturgy. And I had dance students basically taking seminars from me and writing about each other and critiquing each other's performances and so forth. But so I spent many, many hours in the studio of young people and conservatory students and all the different dance companies that came to Montclair State over the 15 years I was there, and interviewing choreographers, but mainly the studio time. See, I feel now in retrospect, and we were talking about this before, I feel that there's no shortcut to devoting time to giving yourself up to the experience of this kind of art form. And I think that being in the studio, I put that on a more profound level than going to shows, which I love doing too. But when you're there and you start to see, like I've heard of Doris Humphrey was one of Martha Graham's / rivals, but not really. But Doris Humphrey said, all dances are too long, which is an interesting statement. No, it's an interesting statement because I'll just give one quick example of this. I decided I would try to imitate Martha Graham's research for just one of her dances to see how it felt to actually use the books that she used. So she went to the library and she took out all these books and lugged them around like this, and she put them in her house and she took notes every night. And so it was Cave of the Heart, which is one of her like more epic, archetypal, mythical sagas. So I started going through all these different books, and like I had her journal so I could see what she took notes on. And then before I knew it, a half a year had gone by. I'm telling you, I said to myself, you know, you do have a contract with a publisher and they are expecting you to deliver this book. So, but that was to respond to this comment, that was another insight into the thing that I think I would hope people would come away. Some people who are not as acculturated to dance might come away with the understanding of it's like a cornucopia. A dance to me is like a cornucopia with a giant, huge opening, and then all this energy and time and movement and research and direction and correcting and perspiring and throwing everything out and then starting all over again to end up with we have to get this down to 6 minutes. I mean, you know, it's okay. I know you guys want it to be 7 minutes, but I'm sorry. We really have to get it down to 6 minutes. So, you know, that kind of thing. I feel like that respect for the way the work is done is, I hope it was contributory to how I wrote about it. I think that has a lot to do with it.
I'm trying to figure out which one of the last 3 questions I can ask in the time that we have. Let me see if we can get through 2 of them.
Okay.
So there's a quote that Martha says, "Always there has been a dancer who had been dissatisfied with the existing forms, for whom the traditional style became too sterile and broke it open. And this constant reorientation and re-evaluation, in this repeated return to original sources, lies not only the future, but the power of the dance." Now, Martha, I saw the quote, I heard the quote, and I actually thought a lot about, there's a term, proverb in Ghana called Sankofa. And it's actually, you know, the earrings that I have on, actually. The term translates to, it is not taboo to go back to what you forgot or what was left behind. And so Martha was deeply inspired by different cultures and civilizations. Why do you think that was such a profound footprint, especially, speaking about, Dennis Shawn, where she had come from and the choices that she made differently for herself and for her company.
So in the second hour of our conversation, we'll have a...
Stick around.
No, but see, the takeaway from that quote, I love that quote. I'm so glad you picked that out, because there's a few things in there that I really like. One is the iconoclast, the implication of the iconoclast, that the breaking of the tradition, and a lot of that sort of has gotten layered into the Martha Graham mystique. I'm not saying it's bad, it's just that it's layered in there, like the rebel, the pioneer, the iconoclast, the heretic, but in fact, she was first of all, she stepped outside the ballet box, yes, but she ostensibly sort of criticized her girls if she found out that they went to a ballet show. She would, I heard you went to see such and such last night, and I don't ever want to. This is all part of the posturing and positioning, which is part of Martha Graham. I mean, it makes me want to sit up straight when I talk about it. It's very true. It's kind of rectitude, but really, she understood the foundationalism of her art form. She went back to pre-antiquity. The Metropolitan Museum of Art next year is going to have a big show of the Cycladic, I believe it's pronounced, or Cycladic, Cycladic sculptures, which are pre-Grecian. And they showed one in the catalog, and it looked like a pose right out of Martha Graham, with the hands like this, the contractions and everything. So she was very into the primordial origins of the way the body expressed itself. And she brought all of that forward into the 1920s. But first, she served her time in vaudeville, and she traveled around the country in the train, and she schlepped here and there in all these little towns and all these, fancy dancing kinds of things with movies and all the whole vaudeville thing. But her ultimate derivation is out of a huge, huge tradition. So she took the tradition, and I think it's better to think that she sprouted wings from the tradition and made her own language. But that's what's so great about, to me, one of the greatest things about Martha Graham is when you realize how primitive her modernism is. That's what's really great about it. And one of the things I think is great.
It's going to lead into my last question.
Okay.
Ooh. And then you get to ask questions, so get ready. Yeah, this is your warning. What do you think, what is one of her philosophies that you think resonates the most with artists today?
I'll tell you what it is. It's to keep going. I think that because it's to Martha Graham, I think this also spoke to me after I was in my 10th or 11th or 12th year of working on this. And my family, my beloved wife, who tolerated this, and my kids, and then during the time I wrote this book, I had 4 grandchildren were born while I was writing this book. That's who I dedicated the book to. Because that's how long I worked on the book. But that's a good example of persistence. But I believe that, and I'm not just saying this because of how old I am, because I remember thinking this a long time ago, that you have 2 choices. You can either sort of not get out of bed and just stop, or not go up to your study one day or not go to your typewriter as I had in the beginning, if there was of you who may remember such a thing, and not, you know, everybody else is outside in the backyard playing, or they're going to the beach, and you're like up in your little room, and where's Neil? Oh, you know, he's working on his book. And so you come to terms with this as she sort of reinforced this determination that one has to have. And I'll just say one quick thing so we have time for questions. So, like last week there was a rehearsal I went to of the company, and it was like a studio series, so you could come to the Martha Graham studio like this, and they would do a rehearsal, and then you could ask questions. And someone asked the premier dancer of the company a similar kind of question. And this is a woman who's been with them for 15 years, and she simply said, well, you know, we just come in every day, and we work and we work and we work until we get it as good as we can get it, and then we just go out there and do our best. And I know this sounds very reductive, kind of maybe, or mundane, but it's sort of like she taught me that, Martha Graham taught me that as a writer, even after having written all the books I've already written.
Beautiful.